Well, here we are at the end of another year in the Christian calendar on Reign of Christ Sunday. This feast day, also called the Feast of Christ the King, was established by a Christian leader, Pope Pius XI, in the decades leading up to the Second World War. Pius was concerned for the people of God as he witnessed a rise in nationalism and its dynamics that he found rather prophetically unsettling. He established this yearly reminder of Christ as King as a culmination of the Christian year, to recall us to the truth that for the people of God, our ultimate loyalties lie with King Jesus, not with king and country, or in our case, with president and political party. What an encouraging and timely reminder this is for those of us in the United States just now, a time, as George Eliot described it long ago, of dim lights and tangled circumstances. It's good to remember to whom we really belong. Jesus Christ, the Good Shepherd, creator of Lord and heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen. It's from this vantage point of remembering Jesus as our true sovereign that we come to our gospel reading this morning. Now, the context of this prophetic story of Jesus enthroned in glory, surrounded by all the angels, gathering the people of all nations before him, either for invitation into the inheritance that God's been preparing for his beloved humanity since the beginning of time, or for final separation from the God they've already been living far from, the context is important. Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives on the Tuesday of Passion Week. His entrance into Jerusalem on the back of the colt of a donkey is behind him, as are his final teachings in the temple at Jerusalem, and his heartfelt lament over the city's rejection of the ways that make for peace. His disciples' comment about the grandeur of the temple as they leave it prompted Jesus' prophetic statement that not one stone will be left upon another. And so they come to him privately now on the Mount of Olives to ask him, when will all this occur? And as we know from our readings over the past number of weeks, Jesus uses apocalyptic, dramatic language to warn and encourage them about what will happen in the days ahead, at the end of the age, to use their language. The story we listened to together this morning is not a parable, it's not a metaphor, but is actually a prophetic vision of a future event that Jesus knows will follow the terrible next few days he's about to walk through as he's taken, unjustly tried, beaten, mocked, and crucified. We know that what's coming this next couple days is very much in Jesus' mind, because just after the final words of today's gospel reading, the next words recorded by Matthew are, you know, he says to his disciples, that after 2 days the Passover is coming and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. This story of Christ as King and the sheep and the goats is not only the culmination of Jesus' teachings on the end of the age, recorded in Matthew. Today's reading is also the culmination of his earthly ministry, right before his passion. And the people who chose this reading for today, for Christ the King Sunday, the culmination of the Christian year, were actually quite wise, I'd say, to bring it to our attention for at least 2 reasons. It reminds us clearly who Jesus is, and it reminds us who we are. First, who Jesus is. In the entire book of Matthew, where Jesus has spoken about the kingdom of heaven over 30 times, this is the first time, this reading today, that he explicitly identifies himself as a king. And not only as a king, but as the king of all the nations of the earth. And as our reading from Ephesians this morning elucidated, the king of all rulers and authorities and dominions and powers of the entire cosmic order in which the earth is a part. Matthew's witness of Jesus' ministry has recorded a life and ministry filled not only with revelatory teachings about who God is and what God values, but it's been a life of ministry that has overflowed with shepherding, love, and the lordship of God for his people. Mirroring our reading from Ezekiel, where over 20 times God takes the initiative and says, I myself will search, seek, gather, feed, heal, and yes, judge his sheep. Jesus, too, as God enfleshed during his life, has sought out the lost, the broken, the lonely, the sick and the oppressed, the despised, and even the dead, and has gathered them lovingly into relationship with himself and with the people around them. And yes, he has also chastised the arrogantly powerful who have used their power and resources only for their own ends, as if the lowly were unworthy of their attention. And now, 2 days before he knows he's to be taken by the powers that are literally anti-Christ to be executed, Jesus tells the story of our gospel reading today. He tells it to his intimate disciples huddled around him on the mountain. And I suggest, in a sense, he tells it to himself. Jesus takes the time at this crucial juncture in his life and ministry to remember who he is. He is the Son of Man. He is the King. He is the Lord. He is the beloved Son of God. And from that place of remembering who he most truly is, he chooses to continue to embrace his role as a human being who will be considered the least of these. He chooses the human experience of being an utter failure, a criminal, a man betrayed by his friends and enemies, humiliated, thirsty, lonely, desperate, and even, it seemed, abandoned by God. Pilate mockingly said to the crowd gathered to condemn him, "Behold your king." The soldiers wove their crown of thorns and covered him mockingly with a robe, bowing to him as they jeered. They nailed a sign to his cross that mocked his kingship, Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews. The religious leaders who set him up to be crucified mocked his relationship with God. The judgment that we hear in the prophetic glimpse Jesus gives us of the future, and that we've been hearing in the stories over the past weeks together, it's never judgment of a distant, unfeeling God, but of the God-man, Jesus the Christ, who has walked in the shoes of the despised and knows in his very flesh and blood the utter cruelty and indignities of true injustice, not just inconveniences, not irritations of not getting one's own way, but deep, heart-rending injustice and betrayal. And justice matters to God. And it's from that place of being both loving shepherd king and despised as the least of these that Jesus reminds his intimate friends, his disciples, who they are. And in doing so, he reminds us of who we are, if we are his disciples following in his path. We are, the scriptures tell us, his people, the sheep of his pasture, sought after, fed, held, loved, healed by the good shepherd, and sometimes, like him, marginalized, outcast, and suffering. And someday, vindicated by the King of Kings from all the injustices that we as his people experience. And we are too, as his disciples, sheep that take care of each other. We learn from Jesus. We follow him. We embrace the values he lived, and we seek, therefore, to be imitators of Christ as his dearly beloved ones. Like him, we are continually to seek, to gather, to feed, to heal, to enter into the experiences of those betrayed by the powers of this world's systems from a stance of our own belovedness as daughters and sons of God, his sheep. And just like our King, when broken and despised by this world's systems, we're also to receive the love and care of God from one another. This dual role of our being beloved givers and broken receivers of the care and love of God came to my mind this past week when I read a brief account by Edwina Gately, founder of a residential program for women in prostitution in Chicago, of her encounters with a man named Stanley. She writes this: "Stanley always brought joy to my heart in the despairing streets where I used to walk. Whenever he saw me, Stanley would do a little dance of delight, and his face would light up as he pranced across the street to hug me, bracelets and bangles jingling all the way. Stanley was a gay man, a hustler, trying to survive by selling his body. But he was a gentle soul, eager for friendship and acceptance. I love you, he would sing aloud as he hugged me. I looked for Stanley, and I would smile and say back to him, I love you too, and he would beam with delight. I always looked for him and listened for the jangling of his cheap jewelry. He was a special and beloved character on the harsh and soulless streets. Yes, Stanley was gay. He was black. He was a hustler. He was an outcast. He was impure. He was my friend, and I loved him. And clearly, Stanley loved her back. As the sheep of God, we love and we allow ourselves to be befriended by, embraced, loved by those that this world's systems, and sometimes it must be said even our broken church systems, deem as the least of these, in imitation of our King. Such radical loving and caring takes courageous vulnerability. Like the sheep in the prophetic story that Jesus told his disciples, we may question this. When did we see you, Jesus? In him? In her? In myself? When we meet the least of these, and when we find ourselves as the least of these, as needy, broken, maybe even despised, our King gives us a way forward in his good company. Allowing ourselves to be seen with them and to be friends of sinners like Jesus was may, well, honestly, it will bring up our stuff, our pride, our insecurities, our private fears and vulnerabilities. It's one thing to be the well ones who give care and healing to others. It's another thing altogether to follow our King to the cross, to humbly embrace experiences of profound brokenness and recognize in ourselves what it is to be the least of these. Yet, this is the path our King sets for us. As he sits on the Mount of Olives and looks toward Jerusalem, knowing what the next few days will hold for him, this is the vision he sets before his disciples in his last full discourse of teaching. He shows us who he is: Son of Man, Lord, Christ the King, and he is the least of these. For what our King knows is that it is in the most profound experiences of loss and grief that we will meet him loving us in ways we didn't know we could be loved, and his love flowing through us in ways we never imagined. And when that happens, the compassion and love that grows in us transforms us into who we most deeply are, the beloved and loving people of God and of his Christ, our King. May God give us the vision and the courage to truly behold and follow our King wherever his paths take us. For ultimately, in the end, it will bring us to the inheritance that has been prepared for us from the beginning of time. It will bring us to the abiding place of the King himself. It will bring us to love, and it will bring us to one another. Amen. Precious Lord and King, help us to remember that wherever we find the courage of kindness, the kindling of hope, the face of forgiveness, the fingers of mercy, the presence of love, there we find you. Amen.